So there is a deal on Gaza at last. It is not at all clear whether it is really Joe Biden's deal or Donald Trump's, but perhaps in the end it doesn't matter. What isn't in doubt is that Donald Trump will most certainly be in charge of what comes next. Only a few days to go now, and then it all changes. Welcome to Talking Politics USA. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Talking Politics USA. I'm joined by Dan Rivers, our US correspondent, alongside Brett O'Donnell, who's a Republican strategist and veteran debate coach. Both of them are in Washington, and Washington is a city reacting, as the world is indeed, to the news, not from the States, but the Middle East, that an agreement has now been reached to pause Israel's war in Gaza. The conflict has, of course, claimed tens of thousands of lives over the past 15 months, and this deal, whilst only temporary, is intended to ensure the release of dozens of hostages now and the chance of a lasting peace to follow. Hello to you both. Perhaps we can just talk about the shape of this deal, what we think of it. Dan, you've covered the Middle East on and off over the course of your career. Talk us through what we know of the deal so far and what you make of it.
Okay, so it sort of breaks down into three phases. The first of which perhaps is the most kind of important. It will involve the release initially of 33 hostages in return for Palestinian prisoners. There will be the beginning of a withdrawal of Israeli troops from key areas in Gaza. Then the idea would be that would give way then to phase two, of which the details are still admittedly yet to be completely hammered out. But I think the idea is that, the goodwill would build as the, release of hostages on the one hand and the release of Palestinian prisoners on the other hand builds up this kind of currency of goodwill. The second phase would end up with a sort of total withdrawal, a complete cessation of hostilities, the end of the war, if you like. And then phase three would be the kind of rebuilding, trying to create a new interim administration under a UN figurehead, and thousands, millions of dollars of aid pouring in to try and rebuild the shattered landscape of Gaza. So that is the kind of broad sweep of this deal. It looks like phase one has been agreed. Having said that, as we are talking now, the only slight fly in the ointment is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, was saying there are still some parts to hammer out. Now, I think he might be referring to phase two rather than to phase one, because in the last few minutes we've heard from Joe Biden talking about the historic nature of this deal that he said, was in essence the same deal that he proposed back in May. And that was endorsed by the UN. We've also heard significantly from Donald Trump. You won't be surprised to learn, saying this, describing the deal as an epic ceasefire agreement, which only could have happened, he said, as a result of our historic victory in November. And he went on to say, we've achieved so much without even being in the White House. Imagine all the wonderful things that will happen when I return. So both the outgoing administration and the incoming one, both sort of trying to take credit for this deal. And as we've discussed on News at 10 before, Tom, I think, from Trump's point of view, he made it very clear he wanted this to be done before he was inaugurated. He sees Gaza essentially as a political millstone that's hung around Joe Biden's neck and as a distraction from the other things he actually wants to get on with domestically. So, as he said, all hell will break loose if it's not done. Well, it appears this deal is 99.99% sorted, apart from the details of the more distant phase two and phase three.
Brett, is this Donald Trump's deal or Joe Biden's, and does it matter?
Well, I think it's Donald Trump caused, for sure. His warning to Hamas that if they didn't release the hostage, get a deal done, that all hell would break loose, certainly seems to have been the impetus to push the deal through. I think they take his threat very seriously. Why? Well, because they're supported by Iran, and Iran has history in dealing with Donald Trump. His campaign of maximum pressure brought the Iranian economy to its knees and really clipped the wings of the Iranian ability to fund Hamas and Hezbollah in the region. So I certainly think Donald Trump should get a lot of credit for the timing. The framework, we have to see all of the details. We're certainly glad that hostages will be released. I wish that all the hostages would have been released immediately because, Hamas instigated this. They started this war. They attacked the Israelis. They took hostages. I really wish that all the hostages would have been released as part of the condition. But certainly getting a deal done has to be credited to Donald Trump. It'll be him who implements the deal, and it'll be up to him to make sure that the terms of the deal are met. Most importantly, that Hamas can never again reconstitute itself in a way that can attack Israel. So Joe Biden may say it's his framework, but the timing and the implementation are going to be credited to Donald Trump.
Well, whoever deserves the credit, one thing we can all agree on is that this is now entirely Donald Trump's world. He's about to walk into the White House. He's going to be really all-powerful, as we've all discussed before, for the next 4 years, certainly for 2 years until the midterms. What do we think there are so many question marks for me over this. What does Donald Trump and others around him, and potentially the Israelis, want for the governance of Gaza? What does Donald Trump want vis-a-vis Israel? What does he want when it comes to the two-state solution? Is he interested in seeing Palestinian statehood? Does he want that essentially to be part of his legacy when he comes to the end of his term? What does he want vis-a-vis Iran? Brett, you've just been talking about how he took quite a tough line on Iran. So what do you think Dan, maybe you go first and then Brett pick up on it. What do you think he both wants what do you both think he wants out of the next 4 years?
Well, look, I think one of the things that is motivating him is securing complete normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That was something that was sort of sketched out in his first term in the Abraham Accords. I think he is, he wants this war over partly to clear the way for a deepening of that relationship and a normalization. And I think he's thinking of that both in terms of how good it would be for the region, how good it would be for the US and Israel, but also for his own legacy as well. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sure of it. I'm sure that's part of the psychology that's playing here. He knows Barack Obama got one, and I think he thinks this might be his bridge to being considered, his legacy, his place in history, if he can get that done. But my goodness, as you said, Brett, the implementation of this deal that, is essentially Joe Biden's architecture that's been pushed over the line by Trump's impending administration, that's going to be really tricky to make sure that goes through. And don't forget, Benjamin Netanyahu's government is hanging by a thread, really. I mean, he's got these right-wingers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who have tried to thwart this deal at every which way over the past few months, that they don't want it. I'm sure they will be doing their best to try and get what they want, which is essentially a buffer zone in northern Gaza. That appears to have slipped away from them. But the implementation is going to be the really tricky part of all this, and it could still easily all fall apart after this historic moment that we're at today.
Brett, assuming Dan's analysis is right there, and the normalization between the Saudis and the Israelis is something he's very much looking for. Would you agree that it's very hard to see that happening without Palestinian statehood? I can't really see the Saudis agreeing to it. Now, Donald Trump arguably is uniquely in a position to perhaps push and persuade and cajole Israel in that direction. But is that really what he wants? And do you think he's capable of achieving it?
Well, I do think, I do agree with the analysis, and I do think that he wants peace in the Middle East and an expansion of the historic Abraham Accords. I think that, I firmly believe that Hamas was instigated into the attack to thwart what was an impending agreement between the Saudis and the Israelis. And so I don't know that having a two-state solution settled would be a precondition for an agreement between Israel and the Saudis. I think the preconditions there are going to be how in check Iran is, and will it be acceptable to the rest of the Arab world? I think that Donald Trump can get there, and I do think it would be a historic agreement. So I would go a little bit further and say, yes, he definitely wants peace in the Middle East. He wants to have this settled to expand the Abraham Accords. I think he believes he didn't get the credit, and I agree with him. He did not get the credit that he deserved for that historic agreement negotiated through Secretary of State Pompeo and Donald Trump. And I think that he wants to expand that. Adding Saudi Arabia would be huge. But I think all of that's going to be contingent on how Iran is settled out and what their influence in the Middle East becomes. And so I think he's going to have to walk a line between going back to maximum pressure on Iran to decrease their influence, their ability to fund Hezbollah, fund Hamas, which weakened them. If you remember, during the Trump administration, there were numerous reports that Hamas and Hezbollah were running out of money to fund their activities because Iran was unable to provide it to them. So I think that he'll have to toe a hard line on Iran to get the Middle East to a place where he wants. A two-state solution is tough. And as long as Netanyahu is in place, I think that that's going to be a very, very, very tough achievement to make. Many presidents have tried and failed to deliver on a two-state solution. But I do think he'll continue to support such a solution. I think Israel will push back because they don't ever want to see what happened with Hamas from Gaza happen again. And so I think there'll be strong pushback from the Israelis, which might thwart any such agreement.
Maybe I could just jump in and ask something to Brett, Tom. Do you think the fact that this is a second term for Trump removes that kind of concern about trying to get re-elected, and that opens up, him taking more risks maybe, or doing slightly more unpopular things, annoying more people internationally, for example, the Israelis? Do you think that kind of gives him the space to chase, that legacy in the Middle East, that perhaps if you're a first-time president, you'd just be worrying about being re-elected?
Yeah, it might. But I do think that the Jewish lobby here in the States is very strong. And I think Donald Trump is very sympathetic. I view him as a president who is Zionist empathetic. And I think there are enough senators and members of Congress that are still left that are sympathetic to that as well, that are going to push back against any solution which disadvantages Israel, weakens its national security. And so, the hang up on a two-state solution is the problem with Israel or with Hamas and the Palestinians refusing to accept Israel's right to exist and refusing to renounce terrorism. And because of that, I think that's going to make getting to any agreement very, very difficult.
Can we just talk about the inauguration? I'm obviously about to get on a plane fairly soon and come and join you all ready for the inauguration. Always a fascinating moment, that transfer of power and all the rest of it. Everyone, out there on the steps watching all the former presidents chatting to each other. It's always just one of the great occasions to witness. Obviously, Donald Trump, made his pitch a certain way the first time around. So intriguing to see how he's going to pitch it this time around, what he's going to do in those early days. Dan, both of you really, but Dan, maybe you first. What is your expectation at this point?
My expectation is, Tom, to pack your thermal underwear, because it is going to be the coldest inauguration since, I think they said 1985 or something. Anyway, it's going to be really cold, sort of minus 10 perhaps during the middle of the day. So it's going to be cold. It's going to be colourful. The village people are going to come and do a rendition of YMCA. So it will have that kind of characteristic, I think, unorthodox approach in some parts. It's going to be a kind of jamboree of all the different kind of parts of his coalition that brought him to this point. to run you through very briefly, what will happen. He'll go and have tea with the Bidens first thing in the morning, and then the swearing in will begin at 11:47, symbolic as he will become the 47th president. And then he'll do this inaugural address, and then there's a signing ceremony and lunch, a review of the troops and so on. And then there are 3 different evening events which apparently he will go to. 3 different kind of, balls. There's a Commander-in-Chief's ball, a Liberty ball, and a Starlight ball. So it's a busy old day. It's going to be a cold day. But yeah, it'd be fascinating to see all those little interactions and the details that I'm sure you'll be picking out during the course of the programme.
Sure will. Brett, what's your expectation?
I expect shock and awe on day one and moving forward. I think the president will probably sign over 100 executive orders, trying to undo many of the things that the Biden administration did. I wouldn't be surprised if in the parade, while President Trump is in the car, he was signing executive orders going down Pennsylvania Avenue, because people voted for change. They want a different direction for the country. And I think that Donald Trump intends to deliver on that, particularly on immigration, the economy, some of the national security things that energy, all of those things that the American people voted to reverse course on. I think Donald Trump intends to show he is going to deliver from day one. So I do expect a lot of action at the very beginning of the administration through executive orders to try and reverse course on many of the things that the American people voted to overturn. I think also you'll expect a very colorful, and I agree, pack your thermal underwear, supposed to be cold, pack your dancing shoes. I think it'll be a lot of pomp and circumstance, but I fully expect that most of the action is going to be through the president's pen over the course of the first few days. And then you'll see a big push for a reconciliation bill or two that takes major action on immigration and on the tax cuts. One of the signature policies of the president's first term were the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and I think he'd like to see those made permanent. I think those would have a huge impact on the economy, and so I think you'll see a big push to get those made permanent and a big action on immigration. So I expect a huge, huge push. The president understands the workings of political capital much better now than he did in his first term. And I think he intends to wield it. And I think he's got a mandate from the American people who voted overwhelmingly to give him the White House, Republicans, the majorities in the Senate and the House. And I think because he knows that it could be limited action for the first 2 years, I think I would expect him to begin moving quickly to try and get a lot of those initiatives through as fast as possible.
Dan, we all agree that Donald Trump understands Washington, and he always had good political instincts in terms of having a sense of where the electorate was. But what he has very clearly now is a much better understanding of how Washington works. How do you think Trump too will be the same, and how do you think it might be different?
Oh, I mean, I think already just, in terms of the sort of confirmation hearings that are going on this week, in terms of the people he's picked for his cabinet, I mean, he's picked some pretty unorthodox characters. So, whereas Trump 1.0, if I can put it like that, he tended to go for sort of, great and good and well-respected generals and so on that surrounded him, that in the end, I think he felt perhaps thwarted what he wanted to do in the end, and many of them left, having fallen out with him. This time he's picked much more kind of disruptor type characters, Elon Musk being involved, Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary, again, someone who, he's largely untested in terms of having run a big organization. And there are a lot of question marks about his personal life, but certainly someone who I think will shake things up and, as Pete Hegseth said yesterday, reintroduce a warrior ethos into the Pentagon. So I think, that's the kind of the theme probably of Trump 2.0 is shaking things up, not doing things like they've been done before, and certainly if any of this kind of 2025 playbook that has been talked about a lot in the press, the kind of blueprint for his second term gets enacted, I think it's going to be a roller coaster, frankly, for good or for bad. But it's not going to be business as usual in Washington.
Brett, same question to you, really. How do you think Trump is the same, and how do you think he's different?
Well, I think he is the same person. He's been a disruptor. He was a disruptor when he came down the escalator in 2015. Immigration was the prime issue then. It's the prime issue now. But I think he understands that he had to build a team of disruptors around him. That's what he didn't have in 2016, because there wasn't, the MAGA movement really grew during the administration. And so now he's got a team of disruptors that he can put in place in each of the cabinet positions that might help him implement and overturn some of the regular ways of Washington. Here in Washington, the sort of consulting class, the lobbying class, the political class, like business as usual, because the town sort of feeds on itself. But Donald Trump intended to drain that. His big mantra was drain the swamp. Now he's got folks around him who he believes that, can cause more disruption, can actually drain the swamp. You see the Doge initiative that's being driven by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, or you see what the different folks that he has tapped for cabinet roles. Those folks are certainly disruptive and want to stop business as usual. Whether that's going to be the big fight, whether or not they can actually get that job done remains to be seen. The Washington establishment is very powerful, very entrenched, and will not give up easily. But I do think that, at least from his standpoint of fighting that, I think he's much better prepared coming into this administration to understand what he's up against and who he believes is the best team to go take on that establishment.
Given everything you've just said, and given the scale of the task as he himself has outlined it, particularly on things like immigration, where one only has to think about it for 5 minutes, and you think about potentially millions of illegal immigrants, you just think of 100,000. Let's suppose he decides to, find and locate 100,000. Physically, that's a lot of people. This is not going to be an easy process to manage, and I think probably everyone recognizes that. I'm sure, including him. Could I just ask both of you to just imagine for a moment that you're Donald Trump's chief advisor the night before the inauguration, and you're looking at this 4-year term, very different from first time around, possibly only 2 years until the midterms when the political weather may begin to change, but you have got a heck of a mandate right now. Dan, you go first. What would you be advising him to worry about? What would you be saying, look, here's what you really need to think about, be careful about, perhaps consider that you haven't?
Well, I think he's going to need some early wins on things like immigration. It's a very, lofty ambition to make all these kind of mass deportations. Turning the supertanker around of the state to actually get that done is going to be really difficult. So I wonder if what they need to do right at the beginning is get some very high profile deportations underway of people who've been convicted of murder or undesirable people, to sort of send a signal to the electorate as well as the other people that they're going after, to say we mean business, and we're right from the get-go, we are serious about tackling illegal immigration and kicking out people that shouldn't be here. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is the economy and the cost of living crisis, if I can put it like that. We're talking, he's talked about a package of tax cuts, but I think there is something that needs to be done about the cost of living here, the cost of basic food, of gas, and so on. He's talked about increasing, drill baby drill, increasing oil production here, but that all takes a long time. Something needs to be done much sooner, I think, because otherwise I think a lot of his of his base, sort of blue-collar America, will very quickly get impatient and feel, hang on a minute, we were told things were going to get better under Donald Trump, and it's still costing us too much to fill up the car. It's still costing us too much at the supermarket. Where are the savings that he promised us? So, tax cuts may come. He's got to get that through Congress, but that's going to take time. I think he's going to need to do something quickly at the beginning to try and get some early wins.
Brett, final word to you. What advice would you be giving Donald Trump on the eve of his inauguration to watch out for?
Yeah, I ascribe to the theory of Norman Ornstein that winners win. And I agree with Dan that he needs some early wins to build his political capital and put the wind in his sails. And I also agree that while immigration is probably issue one for his base, issue one for the majority of folks that voted for him is the economy. And we learned today even that inflation remains stubbornly high and that folks are still concerned about the cost of everyday goods. And so he has to address that. Now, the one place I think he can address that is through the tax cuts and jobs package. I think that if the market were to see that the tax package were going to be tax rates were going to be stable, corporate taxes would remain low, that might send a signal out into the economy and strengthen the economy. But certainly, if the economy is no better now, in 2 years, he's going to have a tough go with it in the midterms, which would make the remaining 2 years very, very difficult for him. So I think the key is for him to get the economy moving, get prices down. I think part of that is unleashing American energy. That's what he did during the first administration, and it made a difference in the economy. It was thwarted by the pandemic. But if he can return our economy to the way it was during the first administration, particularly in years 2 and 3 of his administration, then those are big wins for him that will build public support, particularly among those blue-collar workers. Donald Trump won historic victories amongst the working class, which Democrats had traditionally won. If he strengthens our trade agreements with other countries, stands up to China, make sure that we have free, not only free trade, but actually fair trade, where America isn't getting disadvantaged in trade agreements, and is able to get the economy moving, that will have just as much positive effect on how people perceive him as president as what he does on immigration. But he can get some good wins on immigration right away. I mean, returning to remain in Mexico, signing some of those policies back, and just shutting off the spigot, right? If he's able to just cut off the numbers that have been coming across the border, that alone will be a huge win. And then I agree, get the worst of the worst out of the country first. And I think if he does that, those are the things that he should keep his eye on the ball. Avoid the distractions and the traps from the Democrats and push through your policy. He did this the other day when he secured the victory for Speaker Johnson. That was his victory. And I think if he will follow that same model, he can get Republicans to come along, and he'll get some Democrats as well who are well aware that they're in a precarious position on the economy and on immigration. I actually think he can have a very successful presidency.
Okay, I'm looking forward to talking with you both more over the inauguration. It'll be fascinating as always. But for now, both of you, thank you very much indeed. That's all we have time for this week. We'll be back next week for the dawn of the second Trump presidency with all that brings. But for now, from all of us here on Talking Politics USA, goodbye.